Hey everybody, I'm here with Chessie, and we've got a couple new arrivals from Lionel. I've got two of the new Union Pacific Legacy Veranda Turbines, and we're going to check them out right now on Eric's Trains. Alright, so Chessie has run off for the moment. I guess I did too many takes and he got bored. But for today's unboxings, we'll be using this knife from my knife collection. This is a custom knife made by MT Knives, and it was a custom run done in 2021 for Dixie over at Homemade Wanderlust. She's got a YouTube channel where she does backpacking videos, and because I'm a Patreon supporter of hers, I was able to get in an early order for these knives, and as you can see, I actually got number one. They're individually numbered, and I got the first one, number one. And there's the logo for Homemade Wanderlust, and it says 2021 underneath. And because I got number one, she actually sent me a card, and I got it around the holidays, so it's a holiday card. And she said, "You got lucky number one." Very cool. So it's a really nicely made neck knife, razor sharp and beautiful. Pretty cool. So I've got two verandas here. This one is Union Pacific Legacy Veranda Turbine number 61 in more of a prototypical paint scheme like the actual veranda was. And then the second veranda is a Fantasy Greyhound paint scheme, which I thought looked really cool. Now, I kind of wish I had gotten the US Armed Forces version with the shark nose on it, and I might get one of those at some point if one becomes available, but for right now I've got these two. Alright, so this is Union Pacific Legacy Veranda Turbine number 61, model number 2133501, with an OBS date of 9/27/2021. And by the way, the OBS date is basically the on-the-water date. It's the date that the item leaves China on its way to the United States. There's the box tag. It says Union Pacific Legacy Veranda Turbine number 61, Legacy and Bluetooth control, Legacy rail sounds, dual fan driven smoke units, die-cast locomotive, electro couplers, and 072 minimum curve. This thing's heavy. It's like handling a steam locomotive, all die-cast metal. There's the instructions. Always good to read those. Legacy Veranda Turbine and Super Bass Aux Tender. So yeah, not only is it the turbine, but it's got the Super Bass Aux Tender, which is pretty cool. Alright. Oh man, this thing's heavy. Oh wow. Jeez. I mean, this thing is heavy. It takes two hands to lift. It's hurting my back. Wow. That is amazing. Let's check out the tender. Geez, the tender's no slouch either. It's pretty heavy. I mean, it's not as heavy as the locomotive, obviously, but still. It's going to be interesting to get these things on the scale and see how much this whole thing weighs. It's got to be, between the two of these, it's got to be at least 12 to 15 pounds, if not more. There's that tender with the Super Bass sound system inside. Man, this thing has a great weight. Be so easy to do this in plastic, and yet the fact that it's die-cast metal just says so much. It's beautiful. All right, let's open up the Greyhound. Model number 2133740, UP Legacy Veranda Turbine number 67 Greyhound. And it's got an OBS date of 9/27/2021, just like the other one. I'm going to have to go to the chiropractor after handling these things. Oh yeah. That looks awesome. Very cool. All right, let's get these up on the layout. All right, there we go. So I'm going to go over a little bit of history on the real Verandas, and then we'll get into Lionel's model. So the Veranda was a gas turbine electric locomotive, or GTEL. The GTELs were built by Alco and GE between 1952 and 1961, and they were operated by the Union Pacific between 1952 and 1970. The Union Pacific operated the largest fleet of GTELs of any railroad in the world. The prototype, UP number 50, was introduced in 1948, and then it was followed by 3 generations of production locomotives. At one point, the UP said that the GTELs hauled more than 10% of the railroad's freight. So the GTELs initially ran on what's called bunker C fuel, and while they typically use twice as much fuel as an equally powered diesel locomotive, this wasn't a concern at first because bunker C fuel was so cheap. So for those of you who may not know, bunker C fuel was essentially sort of a waste product left over after the distillation of petroleum. It was this really thick, nasty sludge stuff that was left over after they'd taken away the finer fuels like gasoline and kerosene and naphtha and stuff like that. And because it was sort of considered a waste product, it was very, very cheap. However, there were a couple downsides to using bunker C fuel. First, bunker C fuel was such a low-grade fuel that in a cold state it was super thick like molasses, and so they had to install heaters in the fuel tanks and the fuel tenders in order to heat the bunker C fuel up to 200 degrees Fahrenheit, at which point it could be fed into the fuel lines. Secondly, the low-grade nature of bunker C fuel created a problem with soot buildup and blade erosion within the turbine, and this increased maintenance costs. Eventually, changes to the air intake systems improved the quality of air that reached the turbines, which in turn reduced wear on the turbine blades and increased the turbine's lifespan. But of course, the fuel cost advantages by using bunker C fuel didn't last forever, because eventually the plastics industry began to find uses for bunker C fuel, and also refinement techniques evolved to allow what was previously considered waste oil to be converted to light fuel grades. And it was at this point that the practicality of the GTELs began to erode, and this eventually led to their retirement from revenue service. Now, between the 3 generations of GTELs, a total of 55 units were produced. After the final GTELs were retired in 1970, all but 2 units were scrapped. The 2 surviving units are UP number 18, which is on display at the Illinois Railway Museum in Union, Illinois, and UP number 26, which is on display at the Utah State Railroad Museum in Ogden, Utah. Both units are in a non-operational state, and there are no current plans to restore either of them. So the locomotive that Lionel has modeled here is based on the 2nd generation of GTELs, which had road numbers of 61 to 75. The 2nd generation GTELs were nicknamed Verandas because of the distinct external walkways, and this gave them a hybrid appearance of something between a car body and a hood locomotive. So Lionel offered this latest rendition of the Veranda in their 2021 Volume 1 catalog, and these began arriving at Lionel dealers in mid-January 2022. They did 10 different versions of the Veranda. Most of them are fantasy paint schemes, of course, and they did 6 road names. So they did 4 Union Pacific Verandas. UP 61 and UP 69 are probably the most prototypical looking verandas. They also did UP65 in a fantasy American flag paint scheme, and then they did UP67 in the fantasy Greyhound paint scheme that you see here. Other road names included Southern Pacific number 8505, Alaska number 4501, Great Northern number 5020, Pensy 6201, Rio Grande 4010, and the best one of all, the U.S. Department of Defense number 1941, which is that olive drab green with that shark nose on the front. It looks fantastic, and I really wish I had gotten one of those. I may add one to my collection at some point. Let's get into some stats. So the length of the locomotive itself, not including the big O-gauge lobster claw couplers, is about 20 inches. The length of the tender is right around 8.5 inches, and the combined length is just under 31 inches. So yeah, this is a big one. Now here's the thing I really want to find out. How much does one of these things weigh? So let's push these aside for a moment. And we'll bring out the scales. I heard someone say that Dave Olson at Lionel did a video where he said these things weigh 20 pounds. I wouldn't be surprised. So the locomotive, 12 pounds, 1.6 ounces. The tender weighs, let's see, geez, 4 pounds, 12.9, almost 4 pounds, 13 ounces. And together, let's see what these things weigh. I guess it'll be around 17 pounds or so. Wow, 16 pounds, 14.5 ounces. That's a heavy locomotive. Make sure you don't drop one of these on your foot. So when I measured the pulling power of one of these verandas, it came in at 4 pounds, 6 ounces, which is astounding. And I think that might be a record in terms of pulling power that I've measured over the years. Maybe there was one higher, but I don't think so. And that means when we combine these two at the end of the video and run them together, that'll be almost 9 pounds of pulling power. And what that translates to, whether you're running these together or running one by itself, is that you can pull pretty much anything you want. And because these things are so long, the minimum required curve needed to operate one of these locomotives is 0.72. Now, of course, the reason these things are so heavy and they have so much pulling power is because they're made almost entirely of metal. In fact, it's almost like plastic is an endangered species with these things. Really, the only plastic I can see right off the bat is the clear plastic inserts in the windows. Other than that, everything is either die-cast metal, sheet metal, or brass. And that, of course, makes these things weigh a ton. I mean, these things are so well made, it's almost like it's a Vision Line model, to be honest. Aside from the all-metal construction, you've got a lot of the features you'd expect on a high-end Lionel model like this. All LED lighting, lighted number boards, operational marker lights and headlights and backup lights. You've got Legacy Command and Legacy Rail Sounds as well as Bluetooth on board. And each locomotive is driven by 2 flywheel motors. But the 2 other special features are going to be the dual smoke unit setup as well as the super bass auxiliary tender. So let's talk about those for a minute. So you've got 2 fan-driven smoke units, one for the turbine exhaust right here, and then one for the diesel generator back here. Now, when you first start this locomotive up and when it first starts moving, you'll only get smoke from the diesel generator back here. That's normal. And then when you get to about 15 miles per hour on the Legacy remote, you'll hear the turbine spin up and you'll get this big plume of smoke coming out of the turbine exhaust. It looks really cool, and you'll see it in just a couple minutes. And then there's the super bass auxiliary tender, and as its name implies, its job is to add a lot of bass or add a lot of oomph to the audio footprint of the veranda, and it does a pretty good job at that. So it's kind of like its own independent locomotive in a way, just without motors, because you can program this thing independently of the veranda. So it's got its own sound system on board, it's got its own electrocoupler, and it's got its own backup light. And then you've got 4 switches down here: run program, Bluetooth on off, signal on off, and dialogue on off. And so the instructions say that if you're going to run this with the veranda, to assign it the same ID as the veranda, and that way they'll run in concert. And then the dialogue switch enables or disables the crew talk sounds on this thing. and the signal switch enables or disables stuff like the horn and bell. So the way I like to run these two together is I disable the dialogue on the auxiliary tender. That way the crew talk sounds only come from the Veranda, but I leave the signals enabled, and that way when I blow the horn, it actually comes from both units and it has a really full sound to it. It sounds great. So yeah, it's kind of like its own little independent unit, and that means that you don't have to run it with the Veranda. You could run it with any other locomotive or even by itself. It doesn't really matter because you can program this thing independently of the Veranda. Now, when you do run it with the Veranda, if you throw the rear coupler on the Veranda, obviously you're going to want this coupler to be thrown and not this coupler. So what you do is you disable this rear coupler on the Veranda. I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. And that way, because they have the same ID, when you throw the rear coupler on the Veranda, it'll throw this coupler and not this coupler. And by the same token, when you put the Veranda into reverse, because they have the same ID, it'll activate this backup light and not the backup light on the back of the Veranda. Well, you just got a close-up view of the auxiliary tender, so now we'll do some close-up shots of the Veranda, starting with the front. You can see it looks incredible. We've got this beautiful UP logo, a cast-in door, some add-on grab irons, a headlight, and an operating Mars light, as well as operating marker lights and lighted number boards. And then we've got this big, gigantic metal pilot down here. You can't see it from here, but there's safety tread on top of the pilot, which is really cool. Now, I'm sure some people are going to complain because some of these details are cast into the metal rather than separately applied, and that's just because this is not a brand new tooling. The Veranda is not a brand new model. Lionel has had the tooling for many years, and so that's why you'll find that a lot of the details are cast into the metal rather than being separately applied. If it was a brand new tooling made today, I'm sure a lot of these details would be add-on rather than cast in. It's not a big deal to me, but I did want to point it out. And check out that green hood. It looks so cool. Now, the interior of the cab is illuminated. There are also two hand-painted crew figures in there, and although it's hard to see from this angle, the interior of the cab is actually reasonably detailed, which is a nice touch. And as we start to make our way down the side, you can see some nice cast-in details here, and then these trucks, which are very nicely done, but also absolutely massive. And then we've got these external walkways, which, as I said, were unique to the second generation G-Tails and responsible for these things being called Verandas. Got nice metal handrails, lots of cast-in detailing, and then we've got this ladder down here above the truck. And toward the back, we've got this big UP logo and then a window with a clear plastic insert. And, you know, like I said, a lot of these details are cast into the metal body, but they look absolutely fantastic nonetheless. And here's a look at the back of the Veranda. We've got an electrocoupler down here, safety tread on the walkways, add-on metal handrails and a safety chain and a brake wheel, an add-on metal ladder, a cast-in door with a clear plastic insert in the window, and then there's the backup light. As we get up on the roof, on top of the cab, we've got a couple horns, and then we've got all this detail back here. It looks very busy. Here's a close-up of that turbine smokestack, and when it comes time to load more smoke fluid into the smoke unit, you just pour the smoke fluid directly down this turbine smokestack. Now, right behind that smokestack is this little panel, and it pops off like that. It's held down with magnets, and that reveals a whole bunch of engine control switches. So some of these are obvious. You've got run program, Bluetooth on off, smoke unit on off, that's the main smoke unit. Auxiliary smoke is the diesel generator smoke unit. Dialogue off will activate or deactivate the crew talk sounds. Signal on off will activate or deactivate the horn and the bell and stuff like that. And then here's the coupler switch to activate or deactivate that rear coupler. So because I'm running this with the auxiliary tender, I've got the rear coupler disabled. And that way, when I throw the rear coupler, it'll throw the rear coupler on the auxiliary tender and not on the back of the Veranda itself. And you know, if I wanted the crew talk sounds to come out of the auxiliary tender alone, I could disable this, but I like for them to come from the Veranda. And the same thing with the horn and the bell. And then when you're done, that piece snaps right back on, like that. Moving past that, look at all this wonderful detailing up here. It looks incredible. And then back here, you've got the smokestack for the diesel generator. And here's a look at the Veranda's underside. We've got 4 pickup rollers for center rail power. That's good. The inner 2 trucks are the powered trucks. The outer 2 trucks are non-powered and the axles are free spinning. And then we've got 4 traction tires, 2 here and 2 here. There's the speaker for the sound system that's on board the Veranda, and then right here is the sensor for the Lionel LCS sensor track if you choose to use one. And even though you've already seen the underside of the auxiliary tender once, I'll explain some other stuff down here. So we've got 2 pickup rollers for that center rail power. The speakers for the sound system are down in here. And then right here, there's a sensor connected to this axle, and it tracks its rotation, and that's what allows the auxiliary tender to know what sounds to play and when to play them. All right, the last thing we're going to do before we start these things up is BFIMO, best feature in my opinion. Well, my pick for best feature this time around is going to be that dual smoke unit functionality. It just looks so incredible. You've got that diesel generator smoke unit that kicks on at first, and then when you get up to a certain speed, boom, the turbine kicks in and you get a big plume of smoke, and it looks so awesome. All right, now comes the fun part. Let's go ahead and fire these things up.
Dispatcher here. Start her up. Stand by for track orders. Over. Yes, sir. We'll fire her up. Out.
So standing still like this, the only smoke is coming from the diesel generator smokestack back here and the one on the Greyhound unit. But as I said, once these things start moving and we get up to a speed of 15 on the Legacy remote, you'll see a big plume of smoke come out of the turbine exhaust, and there'll be an accompanying sound. So we've got a choice of 5 horn sounds. Here's the default horn. And then we've got this one. This one. And we go up a bit. And up a little more. And back to the default. And it's the same with the bell. We've got 5 choices of bell tones. So here's the default bell. Here's the next one. And back to the default. And then we've got some crew talk sounds.
Dispatcher, am I clear to the outbound? Over.
Alright, so there you have it, the Lionel UP verandas. I think these models are absolutely fantastic, and as I said earlier, I'd like to try to pick up that Department of Defense veranda at some point. That would be super cool. Now, if you'd like to pick up one of these for yourself, the retail price is right at $1,650, which, yeah, that's a lot of money, but, you know, all things considered, with the day and age that we're in, and inflation and prices and all that kind of stuff, I actually think $1,650 is a reasonable price for these things, considering what you're getting. I mean, you've got the dual smoke units and all metal construction and the auxiliary super base tender. I mean, you're really getting a lot for your money. Now, keep in mind, $1,650 is the full retail price. If you go through a good Lionel dealer, you should be able to get a little bit of a discount off that retail price. And as always, if you're looking for a good Lionel dealer, try my favorite train store, which is Legacy Station. You can find them on the web at legacystation.com or give them a call at 770-339-7780. If you'd like to support this channel, I would greatly appreciate it. That can be done through Patreon at patreon.com/ericstrains. Patreon supporters get access to all sorts of perks and benefits, and you can read about those benefits on my Patreon page. I'd like to put a big thank you out there to all of my current Patreon supporters. Your support means the world, not only to me, but to the future of this channel. And finally, if you'd like to buy an Eric's Trains t-shirt or anything else I might be selling, check out the Eric's Trains online store at ericstrains.com/store. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm Eric Siegel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.